Ah, quiet. Just the way I like you. Good morning. How was last night? Did you all enjoy much food, much dessert, fun activities, the works? So, ComCon Day 2, technically. Everyone gets very confused about the naming of days at ComCon. I do too. The schedule says this is Day 2, so it's Day 2. And that's the way that it's going to stay. So, ComCon 2023. To understand ComCon, we have to take a look a bit at our history and what came before it. So in 2018, we did our first ComCon. It was at a country estate called Wootton House. It was called Wootton House, that's wrong. And it looked something like this. And I think if you look in the crowd, you'll see at least 10 people, maybe even 15, that are here today. So thank you if you are one of those people. You believed in an event that was kind of not new, because residential events exist, but you believed in an event that from someone that never run an event before, and you've continued coming back. So thank you very much. 2019, we went to Latimer Estate, and that's actually an estate, not a house. And this is what it looked like that year. So again, there's probably at least 10 people in that picture that are here today. Then there's the pandemic, a really bad slide from me. Or maybe I thought of the pandemic and went, oh, it's dark and we don't want to see it. So that was 2020 and 2021. And this is what 2020 looked like for me. This is a vMix session from my office, and you can see there, that's the webcam looking back at me. I was sat on my sofa in my office, and we pre-recorded every single session, and I think there were 40 sessions. No, there were 20 sessions, sorry. There were 20 sessions, and each recording was 2 hours long, because a talk takes 40 minutes to do, but you've got to set up, you've got to maybe do redos. So 2 hours times 20 is 40 hours. I spent a week doing recordings. So this is Fred Posner, a very, very dear friend of mine. And small story from Fred's talk, he accidentally swore while he was doing his recording. And he said, oh, let's do that again. And we went, okay, let's do that again. Anyway, all of these talks weren't live edited. All of these talks were post-edited, and his error made it into the final stream. And I watched it all back and immediately went, oh. It was hilarious. We went and chopped it out, and you can't hear it today. Except for my phone, where it's a ringtone. This is 2021. So we did live editing in 2021, and it was the first version of Broadcaster VC, a product of Everycast Labs. I won't bore you with how it all works, but it was the first real test of Broadcaster VC. Basically, this did nothing for me, and I got very, very, very irritated with vMix at the time, and I said, stupidly, we can do this better. It's a trait. So this is Broadcaster VC, and this is the output of it. Those were all live edited and then output over the course of a week. 2020 was really the height of the interest in web art, in real-time communication especially. And I didn't really want to put on a virtual conference, but we had so much interest in real-time comms, because ComCon was primarily a real-time communication conference, there was so much interest that ultimately we needed to be able to give people what they needed at that time. And that was accurate, up-to-date information about projects like Kamailio, Asterisk, WebRTC in general, et cetera, et cetera. So I didn't really want to put one on. It wasn't ComCon. This is ComCon. This is what ComCon's meant to be. So it was a fun experiment. It was a very stressful experiment. But now we're back, 2023, at the Duncan House. So some ground out of history into today. So some ground rules. Quite simply, don't be a knob. If you don't know what it means, come talk to me afterwards. So ultimately, it means this: the code of conduct, which you can find here. And again, it basically just says, treat each other nicely. The Wi-Fi, if you aren't already on the Wi-Fi is ComCon 2023, and the password is Eccles Cakes. Who understands the reference? You'll find out later. So any issues, come find someone with a black lanyard or a hotel member of staff. Very briefly, say hello to the AV team. The AV team are amazing. They took my brief of, let's do 2019 but better, and this is what we ended up with. So thank you very, very much to Stage Engage for being a very good partner. So they're wearing orange lanyards, or they've got them like wrapped around their belt like hippie people. I remember doing it when I was younger. Speakers, because I should have told you this already privately, but I haven't. So please go and see the AV team 5 minutes before your talk so you can get mic'd up. You should all have handed in your gala dinner letter that you shouldn't have had to really hand in because I should have told the hotel, but let's, you've all done that, right? Lunch today is in the restaurant that you had breakfast in at 12:35. Coffee breaks at 10:55 and 3:20. There's water, there's drinks out the back, but there's proper 20-minute breaks halfway through the morning and halfway through the afternoon. Tonight, games night in the Townley suite, the other room that you might not have seen yet. So we've got a Nintendo Switch, PS5, Xbox Series X, retro arcade machines, and I have to decide, I need a bit of audience participation here. I need to decide whether or not the Switch, PS5, or Xbox Series X gets put on a big screen. So, who would rather see Mario on a big screen than, I don't know, what have I got on the PS5? No, I haven't really got any shooting games on the PS5. Lots of like retro games, like older PS1 type things. So who would like to see Mario racing on a big screen? Yes. Okay, we'll do that. And it's the only choice, really. But it's early, and I want to get you involved. So, we're also, let's go back, and the return of just an RTC Minute. So in 2019, we needed a session of some description, and I was talking to some friends that went to Ruby conferences, and they said, we do this thing called Just a Minute. And I was like, what's that? And they were like, it's a game that's on BBC Radio 4, I think. And I was like, that sounds a bit boring. And then they explained it to me, and it's absolutely hilarious. And yeah, it's going to be great. It's only 10 minutes this year, but you should absolutely come and enjoy it. And hopefully I fixed it. The thing that went wrong in 2019, I blamed it on buzzers and RF interference and things going weird timing-wise. No, it was me. It was just bad code. So hopefully I fixed it. It's now a web app, which is really quite fun. And apparently, it's not in the schedule. Not in the schedule. Yeah. We're going to do a dancey disco thingy in here. Who wants to do that? So yeah, okay, right. Dan, breathe. I've got 4 minutes, or we might run over slightly. So lightning talks are on Thursday, and if you're passionate about anything and you want to talk about something for 7 minutes, then you should put a talk into cfp.comcon.xyz. It's that, because if you just tell me what it is, I will forget. Sponsors. I'm going to talk about this with them very quickly, because I need to get them up on stage. So, thank you very much to all of our sponsors. Our platinum sponsors, Telet, Element, Nimble Ape, and Everycast Labs. Oh, that looks so good up on screen. So, let's go back and get James from Telet up on stage.
Hello.
Hello. So, James, why did you want to sponsor ComCon? Very, very briefly, because I'm already running over.
You want the real reason, or? No, it's because we've participated in every ComCon so far, and they've been absolutely brilliant, and we just wanted to support you, Dan.
Thank you. And so you've got a room out the back.
We have a room with demos. Some of them may be a little bit dangerous. We're demonstrating a mixture of different 4G and 5G technologies, demonstrating how you can build your own 5G private 5G standalone network. And then one of the reasons I'm here, I'm really keen to talk to developers to talk about things, applications you can put on the back-end core, which in turn makes people want to buy 5G radio access networks. 5G
is something that's really very, very interesting to everyone in media right now for lots and lots of reasons. So there's a talk on Open 5GS and stuff that's kind of around all of that James is going to do. But if you want to learn more, proper in-depth stuff, go and talk to the Telet team in their room. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Anyone from Element in the room? Hello. Would you like to introduce yourself to the crowd?
So, hello, I'm Matthew. I'm not Matthew. Matthew is elsewhere on an important business funding call.
Hold on.
I've been sent to stand in. I'll project for now. My name's Dave, and my job at Element is basically to be a tech lead for the VoIP team, so you can come and ask me anything about VoIP and video in Element. Yes.
And what have you got in? What have you got in the room?
We've got all sorts of exciting demos. So Matthew's talking about Third Room, our immersive interoperable world. That's coming up in about 45 minutes or so right here. So we've got that demo. So you'll be able to put on VR headsets and walk around and play basketball, and we'll have some kind of competition where you can either score the most hoops or build your own immersive interoperable world. It's super easy. You can script it. Maybe you'll win a t-shirt like this. And we've got Demo Development Call, which is our calling platform. So come and see that, and you can see how you can embed calling into Matrix. Lots of other things. Yeah, come along. In our next to the Telet room.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So Nimble Ape is my consultancy business. There's 3 of us here. There's one at home looking after my kids. So thank you very much, Alana, for not being here and looking after the kids. And Everycast Labs, also my business. We're really one platinum sponsor. I should have put them onto one slide. But Everycast Labs is helping power remote participation in ComCon. All of our gold sponsors, we've got Mux, and silver sponsors, we've got SignalWire, SIPGate, and SIPFront. I thank all of them very, very deeply. Basically, I put out that I was looking for sponsors, and they all said yes very quickly, with me barely having to do a thing, which is a event organizer's dream. Community sponsors. Community sponsors basically just give us money with nothing in return. So they are absolutely the best. Not quite as good as Platinum, because Platinum pay us lots of money. But they're really great. So we've got Veneto, Jambons, Pion, Toulouse, Benafo, and SipHub and Applice. And SipHub are sponsoring ice creams on Thursday. Super Secret Road Trip tomorrow. Who knows where we're going? Ah, I thought it was more than that. That's great. So Super Secret Road Trip, sponsored by WebRTC Ventures. Thank you very much to WebRTC Ventures for making it happen. Without WebRTC Ventures, we wouldn't actually be going anywhere. So thank you very much. Lawn games, Cloudflare. The lawn games are out on that lawn in there, and they're there for the whole week. So thank you very much to Cloudflare for helping us out with that. And there's a breakout room in between reception and the restaurant called Portrait. And there's a bit of history in there, so you should ask the hotel about the history of that room. And join our Matrix chat room. You can go to element.comcon.xyz and get involved in the conversation that's happening all week. Tomorrow starts, I say a little bit later. Today we started at 9:15, and that's why I'm now running late. I've probably missed something really, really important. Yeah, have fun. So now, our first keynote speaker. If I've timed this right, and I'm only 2 minutes late. I'm only 2 minutes late. If I've timed this right, please welcome Jeff Pulver to the stage.
Good morning. Come on, good morning. There you go, yes, wow. I'm truly honored to be here. And I'm standing in front of a photograph I took of the Milky Way a few years ago, because it kind of like reminds me of who we are and where we're from, or at least where we made that we're all made of cosmic dust. And when I look to the future, I can't help but remember the past and think of how things are going. And so today I'm, if you notice, the title of this session is The History of the Future. But it's really the history of my past into the future, and hopefully something for you along the way. I'm just curious, just so I can know the level set, how many people of you have ever been to a Vaughn conference? And everyone else probably has no idea what I'm talking about, which is good. So for those of you who know who I am, just bear with me for a few moments. I'll just explain a little background. And then how many people here have been or are currently software developers? Yeah, okay, good. So with that said, I don't know about your past, but I can tell you when I was growing up, I had a few challenges. One of them, there was no internet. In fact, my internet ultimately became a network of people who cared about things that were autonomous and anonymous from where I was living. And I know it was probably, I was 8, 9 years old when it became an issue, but my parents were quite concerned that when I was in elementary school, that is like probably 3rd grade, I had no apparent friends. And that wasn't the truth. The truth was I was around people who just annoyed the heck out of me, and I just chose not to be their friends because I realized being by myself was much more rewarding than dealing with anybody's noise and anyone's issues. But because I didn't communicate this to anybody, I seemed to have been a problem. So my father reached out to one of his brothers, my Uncle Fred, who happens to be an amateur radio operator. And that was sort of the moment that changed everything in my life and has had a profound effect in everything I've done. So imagine coming home from school one day and you're sort of ambushed in a loving way, and you're whisked away in a car for about an hour. And I ended up going to my uncle's office. My uncle at the time, it turned out to be a pioneer in cable television. He was building cable TV test equipment in the 60s and the 70s. Show up at his office, get a factory tour. Well, it's cool, because everyone has to be nice to my uncle. It's his office. Yeah. So I go to his room. And this is where it gets interesting. It was a room not very big, maybe 3 meters by 3 meters, desk, 2 chairs, and then a chair on his side. And there was this box. And I didn't know what was going on. But next thing I know, he goes from quiet, he flicks the switch, and this box starts to glow. And the glow was kind of cool, but it's like, what's going on? And then there's noise everywhere, very loud noise. But this is where it gets tricky, because my uncle was hearing voices and I was hearing noise. And my uncle tunes the dial and he speaks out in this coded language. He says, CQ, CQ, this is K2QQM calling CQ. And repeats that for about a minute and lets go of the microphone. Now, to decrypt it, CQ is the way of amateur radio operators say, seek you. It comes from the Morse code da 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 da, which is CQ. And by the way, that's the disco beat for a lot of 70s songs. And yes, there are a lot of musicians that are ham operators, but it's a different talk. So the thing is that my uncle puts out the CQ, and magically, and I mean magically, for about an hour, people were queued up to talk to my uncle. I didn't realize he was so popular. And all he said his name was Fred, he was from New York, and he gave a signal report. And what I realized at that moment in time is that my uncle had found the cure for loneliness. And that if I simply had this radio in my bedroom, then it didn't matter about school. School was school, but I didn't have to worry about having friends. I could actually contact people before school, after school, and just be. So I asked my uncle if I could take the radio home, and he said, no. And then I pleaded with him. I said, look, I am your favorite nephew. I know this for a fact. He didn't have any others. And you just should let me take this radio home. I'm just going to use it for a few months until school's over. And he said, no. And then I asked him, well, why not? And he said, well, because you need to be licensed. I said, what are you talking about? I just want to use the radio, for God's sakes. He said, you don't understand. When you can teach yourself college-level physics, teach yourself Morse code, learn about the rules and the regulations of what it's like to be an amateur radio operator, I will give you a radio, not this one. I said, oh. And then it's like, okay, so now I'm 9 years old and I want to study physics. What do you do? And I have to say I learned a lot about growing up real fast, and I learned also about what it's like to be not to be a software developer, to become a developer. And because I had a mission, I had someone set my intentions, and somebody actually gave me direction. And I learned a lot about failure, because back in those days, in order to get licensed, I had to show up at a government office on a schedule to take tests. And I would show up. My grandfather used to take me. Failing was okay, but passing was even better. And finally, when I was 12 years old, I had my license. This was a license to communicate, which I like to say is the reason I haven't shut up since. Because it gave such a confidence. But the crazy thing is when you have this license to communicate and you get to this goal, you want to talk to people. And this is when I learned when you're 12 years old, you're just not very interesting, particularly to people who are in their 50s and 60s who are talking to their friends all the time. And here's a voice out of nowhere with nothing relevant to say who wants to talk to you. So I appreciate the kindness, but the first 4 words I learned about being social and amateur radio actually applies to everything I ever tell people about social media, that you have to learn to listen, to connect, to share, and engage with people. And when you do that when you're 12, when you're 35 or 40, it really works. And I ended up creating relationships with people that some of them are still my friends today. Because my true friends were people who I'd never met for a long time sometimes. But we had an inner bond. We had this relationship of connectivity that's energetic by nature, where we had something in common. And let's just say that one of the fun things I had with amateur radio was the ability to do what's called phone patches. So back in the 70s, there was something called long distance. I know in most places in the world today it doesn't exist. But if I had a friend sitting in, in Puerto Rico, and they wanted to talk to their family in New York City, or in my case, I made a friend on the radio in Tel Aviv, and he wanted to talk to his relatives in New York City. It cost dollars per minute back then to call relatives. I didn't realize how cheap my friends were, but they asked if I would be the bridge, and I basically would use the radio for the voice channel, and I patched over to the telephone network, and it worked seamlessly. I mean, of course, nothing was perfect, and you couldn't talk about business, but you got the connection. And that's when I started to realize that the value of voice, the ability to say to someone, I'm okay, I love you, I'm here, I'm present, and how that starts to evolve. And so for me, I became super fascinated with phone patching and what that could do for people. And so that was one part of my life. And I spent a lot of time on the radio, learning, but not even appreciating how that learning would affect me later in life. But fast forward 20 years. And by the way, it was being on the radio that I got into a very, geeky, nerdy thing. By the way, anyone here a ham radio operator? Any of you ever been in ham radio contests? So my drive to learn to code came, I was very fortunate in high school. My family had a Data General Micro Eclipse in our house, so before PCs we had a Data General mini computer. And I hacked into that computer to teach myself how to program. And I actually, in the amateur radio world, there are weekends where we do nothing but operate on the radio, trying to talk to as many people as possible in many different places of the world as possible, and it's competitive. Back in the 70s, it was East versus West. And in the Eastern Bloc, it was actually called radio sport. So you can imagine all these wonderful Olympic sports, and there's radio sport, where you don't get off, you sit in a chair for 48 hours and you talk. And it's draining, but I found energy from that. And I got drive out of that. And so I wrote a multi-user contest program to optimize my operating, because I used to invite people over to our house, and we had a lot of fun with that. So that was how I got into coding. Anyway, life happens. All things happen. And I end up in 1995 somehow working on Wall Street. And by that time, there are some other words that came into my vernacular. Things like intuition, things like premonitions, things that happened which I could not even identify or understand why things operated, because I just didn't understand. I was a little clueless about the world. And I just started to understand, though, that I always did best in school from subjects I was passionate about, things that I love to do. So I was the kind of student that got 4 A's and a D. And it was kind of clear that I had to take versus I was in. And that was the fun part. And then when one day when I'm at work, I end up discovering this software that lets you talk on the internet. So those of you who think iPhone came from Apple in 2007, at least the first iPhone, you happen to be wrong. As many of you may know, Internet phone came from Vocaltech in 1995. Actually, it was built in 94. And I downloaded this software one day, and amazingly, about 20% of the people online, and by the way, iPhone was the first successful UDP-based end-to-end client that ran on the dial-up internet. Any people here originally use iPhone? Ooh. Okay, so now the subset of people is getting smaller and smaller. But trust me when I tell you that 20% of the people who were on iPhone were using their ham radio call signs as their identifiers, as their social media identifiers. And there I rediscovered my hobby. And what I did for no particular reason is I learned also about community. I created a mailing list. I started connecting people so that we're not online, we're offline, we could talk to each other. People would start asking questions about iPhone, and I became the subject matter expert simply by answering the questions. Now, by the way, just to give you a little background, I had no background in telecom whatsoever, except I used the telephone. You know, I was the kind of, I don't know if any of you have any neighbors where when you were growing up, you called your friend up and you always had the same conversation over and over and over again? It was so predictable. So my experiences with AI also happened when I was about 9 years old. I had an across the street neighbor named Robert Sherman, and I had a tape recorder. And for 6 months, I predicted what I was going to say to him and his replies. So every conversation was, I pre-recorded it. I call, I say, hi, Robert, and it's play, pause, play, pause, play, pause, play, pause, hang up. This went on for 6 months until I realized he had no clue what I was doing, and I stopped. But that was when I started first thinking about what would be cool about artificial intelligence, or at least being predictable, having predictable models or predictable development. And I did programming when I was in 3rd grade. It just wasn't so eloquent. And here I am working on Wall Street. Somehow I got there and became passionate about this, my night job, which was communicating. And then a crazy thing happened. In September 95, on this mailing list, someone asks, is it possible to interconnect a telephone and a computer? I literally dialed off my phone patch, dusted it off. I hadn't used it in 15 years. I mean, I have to tell you, when I was in university, I thought it was so cool that I figured out a way to use a 2-meter radio with an auto patch that I put in, and I commuted to college, and I got my senior year in high school, going into freshman year in college, I got my radio working with my computer, with my telephone, so I had basically a mobile phone in 1980, which I thought was kind of cool, but I couldn't get anyone to come to the car to appreciate that, and so it was like, they wouldn't come. I don't know why, but it was just, but 15 years later, I got the better of the joke because these folks came online, I interconnected a ham radio phone patch to my computer, and I got dial tone, the first gateway. And so someone asked, is it possible to interconnect a telephone and a computer? And there was a developer on my mailing list from Jakarta, Indonesia, this guy Isaac Jenny, who wrote, who knew how to write to the APIs of iPhone and knew how to write to the APIs of the Cirrus chipset logic chips. He was writing to the modems chipset. And what he was able to do very quickly is we literally created a gateway. And in October 1995, we launched a project called Free World Dial-Up. Free World Dial-Up connected the world, it ran on dial-up, and it offered free dialing from endpoint to endpoint, and it went viral. Now, this is an internet that had 16 million people, not an internet with 4 billion people. But what was absolutely crazy was I launched this innocently. Anyone who would want to join the project, I was FedExing them modems. It cost me more money to FedEx the modem than the modem cost. I onboarded hundreds of people over time to join the project. And what I didn't realize is that no one had done this before. And that was the roots of Free World Dial-Up, and it was a demonstration. And then, be careful what you do because there are implications. Luckily, it was free, though. So 6 months later in America, 300 phone companies went to the Federal Communications Commission and asked for the sale and use of internet telephony software to be banned in America, and the makers of the software to be regulated as phone companies. And on my mailing list, all this chatter breaks out asking what I was going to do about that. Me? Me? Are you kidding? Me? I was working in IT at a Wall Street company. I knew nothing about politics, let alone what I was going to do about it. But, what I learned in life is that you're the one who sets your own barriers, your own goal, you are the person who can empower you to do anything. You're also the person who stops you. When you learn to believe anything is possible, magic can happen. But it's up to you. And so, after seeing 3 days of people struggling, what's going to happen, and all these people are literally scared, I thought about it, and I coined the term VON in '95 to stand for Voice on the Net and Video on the Net. And what I ended up doing is creating the Voice on the Net Coalition. And in the history of lobbying, this had never happened before. I came out of the ether. I spoke to people in Washington, D.C., had no idea who the VON Coalition was. But here they are, and they're opposing this. And these people were scared. Ultimately, without doing anything other than appearing, we shut down the petition. And that was kind of cool. And then, won't bore you with too many details, but I will say this, that I had a day job, which I didn't like. I learned a lot about inertia. I learned a lot about that feeling that I have to change, but I couldn't change myself, so I had to let the environment change me. And I learned that if you feel inertia, it's a really strong message to you that you should probably be the change or take a change, but I didn't know. And around the same time, I was working with people where I remember in '94, I had this really crazy idea to do web-based email. So I thought it'd be kind of cool to do, because we had all these applications like CCmail and stuff, and I thought it'd be kind of cool to do email on this web page. But my friends I went around, they said it was a bad idea. So I didn't pursue that. And then a few months later, I had this idea to do online mortgage brokering, because where I worked, we had early, easy access to stuff, and other people said, don't do that. So it took me some time to realize I needed new friends. And more importantly, I had to stop outsourcing my future to people who did not know who I was, where I was giving them gateway access to me, and they were setting my direction. They were giving me a pointer. And when I finally understood that it's up to me to be my own compass, for me to find my own direction, that changed everything. And what really helped is, even though I didn't like my day job, I wouldn't leave because I was overpaid. And what was really wonderful is I got fired. And I discovered getting fired can save your life. Because ultimately, where did I work? I worked in the World Trade Center. I worked in a place that 3.5 years later, 700 people from my firm died. 400 of those people I knew. And if I ever had to appreciate being alive, if I ever had to appreciate the magic of just being present, it all hit me at the same time. But along that journey, after I got fired, I decided to do the one thing I was passionate about, which was bringing people together, talking about voice over IP, or internet telephony as we called it back then. And in September 96, on these very ironic dates, September 10th and 11th, I hosted the first gathering in New York City about the future of communications. And getting fired put me on that trajectory. And then 6 months later, I changed the name of the conference to VON, to stand for A Voice on the Net. And the VON conferences had lots of interesting things. And in fact, it taught me a lot, because I had no experience running events. Again, but what you don't know only can, give you unbounded freedoms. The ideas, though, about regulatory policy and stuff that was always present, and there was always a fight. For those of you at VON, you may remember, the way I figured out how to fight lobbyists was, in fact, to bring the regulators to the conference. And that way, the regulators could meet entrepreneurs and understand the state of the art and forget about all the BS that people were being told. This is the truth. And on top of that, I did things which apparently other people just never did. And so I look to have fun. There's something about being cooped up all year round. And, I was a person who failed at going to high school reunions. I realized not to go if I'm not going to have fun. So I decided to create an environment where every 6 months it feels like a high school I wanted to go to. A place where I actually can enjoy myself, and a place where anything becomes possible. And that's sort of that was the imaginary world that I created, that to some extent still exists today. And but the openings were there. I just didn't see how to take advantage of it. But you talk about premonitions or talk about intuition. I don't know how many of you even admit to yourself that you have feelings or gut reactions, or like your gut tells you to do one thing even though logic says something else. But in December 2000, at the height of my conference business, I got a phone call from a competitor who asked me what my exit strategy was. I have to admit, I had no idea. I had to ask him, what is an exit strategy? Because I started the VON conferences by bootstrapping. I didn't have any investors. And this guy had to tell me, oh, it's when you sell your business. And I asked him, why would I sell my business? I'm having fun. So he says, this is what you do in the business that you're in. I said, oh. But I took that as a sign from above that maybe I should take action. And so I hired a broker in January 2001, even though I was entering the best year ever in my business's life. I got the business points done in July. Ironically, the business, and this was a destination-based business where people would come in from all over the world to the conferences. Ironically, the business was sold on September 10th, 2001. So yes, being lucky is okay. Don't ever, ever, ever defend yourself if people accuse you of being lucky. I was accused that during those VON years. People told me everything I was doing was out of luck. Okay, sure, but I'm alive. And then September 11th happened, and I was actually in Atlanta for the to press conference to announce that I sold my business, but that press conference never happened. And then my family gets a phone call that I died, because Cantor Fitzgerald's databases said that I was still working there. And my sister was assuring them I was very much alive, and they were very much trying to comfort my sister. No, I died. Now, the fact that it took 16 years for my sister to tell me this message was kind of weird. But I started to appreciate, when she told it to me, the impact of the things we do and how much we affect others. And I always said that voice is a killer app in terms of the value, but the real value of voice, to me, is the meta information it carries. And while we're living in a world where we're messaging much more by you doing text and emojis and all other variants of language, I think for today into the future, it is the ability to tell someone, I love you. The ability to tell someone, I'm okay, I'm alive. The ability to tell someone, I'll be there in 10 minutes, or that I landed safely, that's still valuable today. And the metadata associated with just being and being present, also terribly important. And the one issue we have, the major issue I think we have in the telecom industry today is trust. Because if you think about it, 27 years, 28 years since the time I got involved, in 2008, 2003, 2001, we answered the telephone. It's only in the last 15 years we've stopped answering the phone, if you think about it. I believe the reason why we don't answer the phone is not because we're relying on apps to do over-the-top calling, it's because we don't trust the originating party. And thank you, voice over IP industry, you collectively made originating calls free. So there's absolutely no barrier to entry for people to originate a call to do bad things. And robocalling is over-the-top crazy in America. It's happening in the UK. It's happening all over the world. If we could trust the originating party, maybe we would answer the calls more. Maybe more revenue would be generated. In fact, maybe some of the business models that have evolved would have changed because we can actually create value-based services based on the person's voice, based on who you're talking, and actually have meaningful conversations. And we talk about trust. I talk about it missing. The word blockchain seems to be a trigger word for many of my friends in telecom because the minute you hear blockchain, you think scam, you think crypto, you think this. Yeah, think it. I'll remind you in 1996 about all the silicon snake oil happening around the internet. How many scams are out there because great wealth was being created. Anytime there's honeypots of opportunity, there are going to be people who come in because they're greedy. Because they're greedy. No, they're just greedy. And so that happens. And so, but if you look past the greed, what you end up finding, opportunity. And so, and somewhere in there is a chance. And so I've been looking at, for the past year, and years really, the intersection of where telecom is, where AI can go, where 5G extended can go, and for that matter, where blockchain adds value. And I think blockchain could add tremendous value in giving you trust, but real trust, not fake trust, but you have to believe that it can be trusted. And then I was doing lots of riffs in my mind about generative AI voice, and thinking about if there's so much bad out there in terms of AI, and I'm sure some of you may be caught in the hype of ChatGPT. In fact, who would think that the best, the most amazing, the biggest killer app in the world in 2023 would be to be able to cohesively write a sentence that's understood? Think about that. If you can write a sentence that's understood by ChatGPT, you win. You're a genius because you're able to understand that interface to do things. But I want you to imagine a time where maybe, I don't know, Google has all my data these days. It could know my mood because it could read my emails. It knows about my love life. It could know about my family life. It could know about my work life. I mean, I always thought that Google would be kind of cool to add more serendipity and synchronicity into my life if it knew about the hard time. Like, I'm trying to pitch James for a startup. I know he likes to invest in startups sometimes, but every time I see him at the conference, he's always busy. And and so I give up. And 3 days later, I'm in London, and I go to a coffee shop. But somehow, when I go on Google Maps, it routes me not to a coffee shop next to me. It sends me to a coffee shop actually about 2 miles away. I say, okay, Google, this is where I should go. I go. Who's sitting there? James. Because James also routed himself to a coffee shop, and Google knows where his location is. And so that's business serendipity. I think of Google Love in terms of paths you walk by and you catch someone in the corner of your eye, and magically they just appear because that's intentional. Sometimes the universe talks to you, but you don't realize it because you have to take things into motion and just process it. I'm going to show you a video that was made in 2010. I look at this as a wonderful indication of where generative AI voice could go if you let your imagination wander. This is just 1 minute. It's actually 59 seconds, but it may seem a little bit longer. Could you run the video, please?
No.
Let the nice man clean your window.
Oh.
Give him the 50.
Here. Yep, okay.
In 100 meters, turn left.
I have to be at the airport in half an hour.
In 50 meters, turn
No,
left.
I can't. I have to.
Turn left.
Okay.
Call your mother.
Hello?
Mum?
Hello, dear.
Mum, the GPS is telling me what to do.
What do you mean?
How's Dad?
Stop the car. Take off your shoes and socks. Tomorrow, take the day off work.
It's ridiculous. I can't take the day off.
Take the day off work.
I can't. I'm just too busy.
You have reached your destination.
What do you think? Right? That was made by an Australian filmmaker in 2010 for a totally different purpose. But if you think about letting go and letting the universe drive you and find direction and set purpose and intention, magic can happen. And magic happens, I'm sure, in your lives all the time. You just don't always recognize it or see the signs of it. But I'm somebody who, for the past longest time, I advocate people to find in their inner self, their inner compass. And when you navigate the Milky Way, I took this picture at 4:04 in the morning on Middle Caicos in an area where there's no light pollution, where what you're seeing the reflection of is starlight and planetary light. And it's a reminder of how unbounded life can be in that scheme of things. We're just made of cosmic dust. We're just a tiny moment in a very long period of time. And one of the things which I never really shared the story about before, which I'll just share you since we have some things in common, is I remember distinctly in 2002 worried about the future of telecom, particularly from a developer's perspective, because in America, the carriers lost the Wi-Fi battle. I'm the kind of person that says, you know what, I'm in a room, I'm in a lobby of a cafe, I can buy coffee, there's lights on, I should have free Wi-Fi. Back in 2002, people wanted to charge for Wi-Fi. In fact, there was a lot of money going into WiMAX. And one day in January 2003, I woke up out of a dream or maybe a nightmare and I was scared. I felt like I traveled from the future to the present to solve a future problem. I actually said that publicly, that part, when I was testifying in Congress. But despite that, I went to the attorneys who helped me create the Voice on the Net Coalition. I asked them, is it possible to be proactive, to ask for regulatory clarity that voice communication that originates on the broadband internet for it not to be regulated as telecom? And they said, sure. It took 5 weeks, but we did that. And we filed the petition. Then I asked my attorney, I asked my friend Glenn, okay, so when does the fight begin? And Glenn tells me as if, Jeff, listen, if you hear Martian signals in your ears, you could file a petition at the FCC for them to block those, but there's a chance that they're not going to do anything. But congratulations. Thanks for taking the time to get your thoughts, collect them, and submit them to the government, because at least they know they have direction. Then it's like, but then be careful what you wish for. I don't know if any of you have been through pleadings with the government for anything, but I submit this petition. 10 days later, it goes out for public comment, which meant that it was for 30 days, people could attack me personally and professionally, and they did. You'd be surprised all the people who came up for reasons why my petitions should not be acted upon. Then I had 30 days to reply back. Then in May of 2003, I got attacked by 2 government agencies, the Department of Justice and the FBI. And it turns out if the DOJ and FBI are after you, you show up. Or more importantly, you find out what's the matter. So this petition was on behalf of Free World Dial-Up, but at that point, FWD evolved from being PSTN to PSTN for free to the largest end-to-end IP network. And what we ended up doing is we had a team. I don't know if any of you know my friend Ed Guy, who was CTO, And we showed up with attorneys and everything. There were 3 people from the government. Only 2 people introduced themselves, which still freaks me out to this day. Because I spent part of the time looking around for cameras, trying to figure out who else is watching us. And they said that our comments are a public record. We're not here to discuss the merits of your petition, but do you mind answering a few questions? And somewhere about 20 minutes into Ed answering every question they could come up with, and after he lost probably about 3 pounds of water weight, sweating, I jumped up. And I said to the people there, look, if you think free will dial-up will help you find terrorists, you own it now. It's yours. They start looking at each other like, what? And I said, if you want to host it and monitor all the traffic, you could do that. Tell me what we can do to be helpful to the government so you guys can get the bad guys, because I'm just running the service for the sake of running it. They had nothing to say. We didn't hug it out, but I'm happy to say that maybe I made a friend in Washington. And then the next day, we met with the White House. We were at the, President Bush at the time had a telecom czar. And we were so burnt out from all of this that our PA pitched the telecom czar of America free will dial-up, our petition. And to our utter surprise, the person says that President Bush is behind you, it's good for broadband in America, as if that helped. And but they gave us all this, and it's like, okay. And this person had, his office was all glass, and he saw us walk, and then we left his office, and we were so burnt out, and I'm very happy that the pitch went well, that he saw us going to the elevator, and as the elevator doors are closing on us, he opened his doors, and he shouted, "Thank you for not asking for subsidies." I was saying, crap, we could have gotten subsidies for all this. Who knew? Like, oh my God. Anyway, 9 months later, on February 12, 2004, the FCC issued something called the Pulver Order. And from that day forward, it was absolutely clear that voice communication and by default video that originates on broadband is not telecom. So if any of you have benefited from that, I don't know, maybe during the pandemic you had to work from home, study from home, or maybe you're in that business, you're welcome. But the whole messaging for that came from really acting on my intuition. That came from not me necessarily, but it was me opening up and listening to direction. And that petition opened up, I testified in Congress, it was fun. Stanford Business School did a case study about that. And when I think about the future, where we can go, the future is dependent on you. And it's understand, if anyone would have told me the truth, that it's impossible to go to Washington and get a law in 1 year passed, I probably never would have done it. But I find being ambitious, passionate, and clueless to be kind of cool. That when you could bring those things together, magic happens. And that we're the ones we are the people who do it to ourselves more than anyone else. That we're the ones who say no. I learned a long time ago that no can be, under the right circumstances, an upside down on. Where if I'm looking to pitch someone to sponsor an activity, to be a customer, to do this, I have to just find another path to that future. And that, there's something about appreciating who you are. I learned some hard lessons. Since the last Vaughn conference, I outsourced 57 kilo. Unfortunately, I got a lot of it back, but I found a way to get rid of the weight by, first of all, not losing weight by outsourcing. Because I found if you lose something like your keys, you sometimes find it, but if you outsource something, you just don't care. And it took me about 13 months. I got rid of about 100 pounds of weight because I have an obsessive personality maybe, and so when I focus, I just do things. And I got into amazing shape, and then I ended up on the beach in Tel Aviv to run in my first 5K ever, but 7 hours before the race, I ended up having a seizure. And I was so physically strong that seizure, I dislocated my right shoulder, I fractured 3 bones in my shoulder, I tore 7 muscles off my bone. And I spent 10 months in rehab, got back into shape, and then I didn't like the medicine I was on because it was supposed to monitor this, because it turns out I think we all are, but I was especially sensitive to dehydration and low electrolytes, so I had to take special medicine for it. But it took away my energy. So I stopped taking the meds, and in August of 2017, I had another seizure. So I gave up, and giving up for me is a lot. I gave up on the overdrive of exercise and appreciated the magic of what it felt to feel good, and decided to take care of myself. And I think the one thing we can all do for ourselves is not gatekeep who we are, that we should allow ourselves to be as unbounded as the infinity of the universe. That you may be worried about your business plans, you may be worried about the opportunity in front of you, but you matter too. Self-love is something which is underappreciated and overvalued and sometimes only happens upon reflection. If you could take the time to discover who you are, it might be time travel, but I used to love to write code because that's where I found I could sit down at 8:30 in the morning and 10 o'clock at night. Where did time go? But it was magic because it was like I'm meditating with the code and I solved the problem. But do the things for you that matter the most, because you get no credit if you get older and you don't do them. And time passes, and sometimes your dreams will go away because your life changes. So don't, it's like I don't live in any regret. I've learned to live in the present moment, that in fact all we really have is the now that we are in. And I've run conferences about this, strangely enough, because as much as I believe in the future, I learned that we have to live in the present. And if you have an opinion, please hold on to it, because as I've learned, only dead fish go with the flow. You owe it to yourself to stand up and to dream, and dream big. I was given an opportunity recently to impact Africa, and I'm going to be in Rwanda, of all places, in August, in a greenfield opportunity to have the first Vaughn conference there. By the way, I should say that after 15 years hiatus, I brought Vaughn back because I had another dream. Except I changed the name to Vaughn Evolution because you guys made Voice over IP happen, so that's awesome. So now I'm looking at what happens next when I overlook the overlays of APIs. I think network API is especially cool, and to look at APIs from 5G, AI, telecom, and even blockchain, and look to where the future is. And if any of you have any desire to visit Rwanda in August, by the way, it's wintertime there, it's not so warm, I'm looking for people who share a dream, because I do believe the next billion people who will join the internet will come from Africa. And I'm actively looking for support of any level, really just because I see a future where magic happens, and that the more we can help people connect, the more the world can communicate. And I thank all of you, whoever were part of the events I was part of. I'm very grateful to Dan to saying yes to having me come here today. Because I will tell you that our future is unbounded, that when you understand that anything is truly possible, but it does require you to believe. I mean, when we were doing Vonage, one of the biggest hassles we had wasn't in the technology, but it was with finding people that actually believed we can do what we set up to do. And so we ended up relying a lot on young engineers who didn't know they couldn't do something. Which is just a reminder, be who you are, whatever that is, and embrace it, and be proud of it, because that's who you are anyway, so why pretend to be somebody else? I'll tell you this, I'm Jeff Pulver, thank you for listening, I'll be around for the conference, and I'm grateful to be here today.